welcome in or welcome back to my channel. I'm Deb from DG Reads and I'm here today to start another arc attack. If you're not familiar, my Arc Attack series is one that basically gives me an excuse to make sure I'm getting to the advanced reader copies that publishers have kindly sent to me. But also the mission in these is to try to get some reviews out ahead of publication date as much as I can so that there are reviews and thoughts and information on these books. So hopefully it can help you decide if it's a book for you or a book that you want to add to your TBR. As I'm starting the Arc Attack, it's December, we're going into January, and there are so many books in January coming out that I would love to get to. I'm not 100% sure how early I'm going to be able to get some of these reviews out. I think probably some of these books may be in your hands already by the time you're actually seeing this video, but I'm trying to get at least a few of them out in advance. So hopefully this will go up relatively early in January with a good number of books in it. As always, when I'm starting this, I'm not 100% sure which arcs I'm reading, but you probably already know from the thumbnail which ones I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and get started reading, and I'll be back once I've started my first arc. I'm here because I am now halfway into The Business Trip by Jessie Garcia, and this is one that I have a gifted audiobook copy from Macmillan Audio and NetGalley, and it is a January 15th release. I'm actually starting it a little bit earlier than I had originally intended to, but that's because the advent calendar that I'm doing for December leading up to Christmas with different prompts gave me a 2025 publication day as the prompt for today, which is actually December 3rd. So this is quite early, but I'm glad that I had the opportunity to get this early on in my TBR this month. In this book, we're primarily following two women, and they're very different women, but seems like something has happened to both of them. As the book opens, we're seeing Jasmine as she's sneaking out of her own house. And this is because the man that she's in a relationship with is abusive. And it very clearly talks about how he's very controlling. It talks about him forcing sex on her. So do check trigger warnings with this. So far at the halfway point, that's kind of been the only instance of talking about rape and sexual assault. It's not like an ongoing discussion so much, but just throwing that out there as well. Jasmine has made a plan to get out. She's drugged him. She's basically put him to sleep. She's sneaking out, and she has plans to catch a flight. She got a little bit of help from someone at work to teach her how to do things like use Uber, because she's never had that much control over her own life, and she's not planning on returning to him. The second woman is Stephanie, and she's on a business trip, and she doesn't have a lot of personal connections in her life. She has a cat at home, and she has a very lovely neighbor who she's good friends with, who takes care of her cat when she goes on these types of trips. But other than that, she doesn't have a family. She doesn't really have connections, and this is why her business takes advantage of that, and she's the one who always gets sent on these trips because she doesn't have a family keeping her home, and her coworkers do. So for these two different reasons, these women's path apparently crosses, or at least they wind up on the same plane. And then both of them wind up sending messages back home that at first kind of explain why they've disappeared, but then as things go on, people start to realize these messages are a little bit suspect. So at the halfway point, we've had a lot of setup to this. We're also seeing, now that the women have kind of disappeared, we're in other people's heads from their lives, the ones who are getting these messages. In Jasmine's case, it's the woman who helped her with Uber. In Stephanie's case, it's her coworkers, and people are starting to put together the pieces that this person that they're texting may not be the person they thought they were texting. So I'm very intrigued by this to see where it's going. It's been a little bit of a slow build up in the beginning, but I am hopeful that this is going to have me hooked. I'm kind of in the mood for a thriller right now, so this is kind of hitting the right spot for that. So I'm glad that I picked this one up. I think the two women we're getting to know a little bit initially, and then we're also learning about them from the people in their lives once they're no longer our main POV characters. And I'm intrigued to see how the author kind of goes about bringing their lives together, but also still showing them as separate women with distinct voices and personalities and so forth. So once I get to the end, I will be back with some final thoughts. I've now finished The Business Trip, and overall, I liked it. I never got to the point, I think, of loving it. It did take some some turns and twists that obviously I can't really talk about in the second half that surprised me. I didn't expect it to go the direction that it went, and there was a bigger twist even at the end, which I really didn't expect. So I did appreciate that about it. I think there were definitely plot conveniences and some things where I definitely had to suspend my disbelief, but overall this one's getting a 3.5 for me. I had a good time with it. I think it was an easy one to binge on audio. I did also pick it up for a while last night in an ebook that I was able to get from NetGalley just because I was in the mood to read something physically. So I would recommend it in either format if you're looking for a quick people doing bad things, men doing bad things, and women getting revenge on them. All of those types of stories kind of come into play here. I think this is one for people who don't mind an unlikable character, who are easily hooked on people doing bad things, looking out for themselves, and doing some over-the-top crazy things. Kylie is now herself doing bad things, being over the top, being a little wild with her ball. So I'm gonna get back to her and play some fetch, and I'll be back when I have more thoughts on the new arc. For my next arc, I am making my way through Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney. This is one that I've been highly anticipating because this is an author who I've had some hits from, I've had some misses from, but there have been several of hers that I have really loved, so it's one I'm very excited for. In this one, we are following primarily an author named Grady, and he was on the phone with his wife, and while he was talking to her, she made a stop. There was a disabled vehicle or something at the side of the road. She walks away from the car and is not seen again. It's now been a full year and no one knows where she went. He's been struggling. He has been needing to write a book. He's overdue on one to his publisher, and his agent finally decides to send him to a remote cabin basically on this Irish island of Amberley, and he's meant to go there and spend time writing. Maybe the change of scenery will help him get past the writer's block that he's had ever since his wife went missing. Of course, when he gets there, he sees someone who looks like his wife. This throws him for a loop. It's a very small island. There's only like 25 residents, and there are some weird things going on here. We're also hearing from his wife's POV about a week before she disappears, and we're getting interspersed chapters from her. We're also seeing some things that she wrote and different things like that going into the story. I read through the first half of this. I actually have the audio arc from Macmillan Audio, and I have this physical arc from Flatiron, and I got through the first half really easily, kind of switching back and forth between formats, and it has been a very easy read to get immersed in, and I'm not quite sure where it's heading. The wife, I don't like. Her POV and her character, she's just kind of a negative person. There are reasons for that. We do get some of her far back past, and we do learn some things that she's been through, which kind of explain that. Grady, I think I'm pulling for. He makes some bad decisions too. So it's one of those things where they're not necessarily the most likable of characters, but at the same time, they're compelling to read about. And I think that's what's going for me, wanting to keep reading and flip pages and all of that in here. I am intrigued about the weird things that are happening, how this island setting is tying into things. It's very isolated. There appear to be no working phones. There's a radio, and that's about it. It's very distant. It doesn't have cell phone signals or anything like that. And he's kind of come to this island a little bit unprepared, I would say. So I'm very intrigued to see where this is going. I've been seeing kind of mixed reviews for this one. People really liking the story and then not liking the ending, so I'm a little worried. But I'm eager to find out what that ending is and what my take on it is. So I will keep going and I will report back once I finished. I'm back because I have finished Beautiful Ugly, and overall I had a fantastic time with this one. I binged the entire thing today, which is always a good sign. I went back and forth between the audio, which did have a little bit of extra production value to it, which I enjoyed, and I switched back and forth, like I said, picked up the print at some times because I just felt like quiet and reading, and it was great in both formats. I think it had some definite twists and turns that I didn't see coming. I had a moment as I was listening in my car where I said, wait, what? And had to rewind a little bit. I think the author did really well at misdirecting the reader. I almost feel like she did it a little too well. There was a little bit where I wish we had maybe had a few clues about what was coming, but I really appreciated the twists and turns, the constant trying to guess and second guess what was going on this island with all of these characters and what Grady had going on. As we got further into the book, I think it really solidified the fact that there weren't a ton of likable characters per se in here, but they were still really compelling to read about. And even as they were making some bad decisions, I think that I still was really interested to read about them and find out what was going on. I'm not sure how I feel about the ending. I feel like, again, it kind of took a turn I didn't entirely expect, but not in a way that took away from my enjoyment of the story as a whole. So this is one that I had a really good time with. It was easy read, a quick binge, and I would recommend it. It does come out on January 14th. I think I forgot to mention that in the first clip, but this is, I think, already out with Book of the Month, I believe it is, if I'm not mistaken. So it's definitely going to be making the rounds. There's going to be a lot of reviews. I think the ending is going to cause some confusion or some debate, maybe is the better word to say it, about ratings and about how the book goes, because it somewhat, I think, will depend on how our ending will impact your enjoyment of the book as a whole. Anyway, without getting into spoilers, that's about all I can say about that. I think for me, this was a good, solid 4-star, high 4-star even, read, and I continue to look forward to more from Alice Feeney. I'm back with my next update. I started At the Bottom of the Garden by Camilla Bruce. This is a gifted copy from PRH Audio, and it is due to be published on January 28th. And this one is a gothic horror, I think it would be classified as, and it is following two young girls who have lost their parents in a hiking or climbing expedition, and their aunt is the last kind of living relative, and because the girls want to stay together, they let people know that their aunt exists, and the aunt comes in the hope of inheriting. The girls' parents were quite wealthy, and the aunt has big dreams to be wealthy, but isn't. And she's really hoping that she'll inherit from the deaths. When she finds out she doesn't, she's very angry, but she learns that if she takes the girls in, she'll be getting a stipend, at least to take care of them until they're old enough to inherit the estate. Now, the girls aren't quote-unquote normal. The older daughter can see colors on people, so she can see a particular color when her aunt is lying. She can see a particular color if someone's scared, so she can kind of read emotion in that way. The youngest daughter has an ability to see ghosts. Now, no one believes the youngest daughter about this, and that's one of my main bones of contention with this book, is that even though the oldest daughter has special abilities and knows there's something to this whole supernatural world or things outside the realm of quote-unquote normal experience, she completely thinks her sister's making things up. Her sister says that she can actually see her parents on the mountain where they died, and she can see ghosts when they get to their aunt's estate, and all of this stuff. The sister just keeps putting her sister down and shutting her down and saying, no, you're not, you're making things up, you're being horrible. And the aunt is bad enough already, and then on top of it to have the sister doing the same thing winds up being a bit much for me. I am finding at the 35% mark where I am now that the story is just really slow moving. I like the youngest daughter. I like the idea of this whole gothic feeling. I like the idea of these ghosts, but we're in the head quite a bit of the aunt and the oldest daughter, and them I'm just not connecting with. And I'm finding that the plot, I'm not quite sure yet where it's going. According to the synopsis, the youngest is going to find ways to bring back the aunt's ghosts. So I'm assuming we're going to uncover things about the aunt and things she's done, and she's going to be plagued by these ghosts as well. We've already seen signs that she is in some way, shape, or form touched or aware that things are going on around her in the house or on the estate, but it's just not moving quickly enough to hold my attention, and it's feeling kind of more historical than it is horror-y at the moment, and I think for now I'm just going to put it down. I haven't seen anyone that I really know read this and give a good review on it to kind of let me know. Maybe I'll eventually pick it back up, maybe I'll be in a better mood for it at a later date and time, but for now I think this one's just not holding my attention. It's too slow moving. It's just not what I need in the present moment, so I am going to put it down for the moment, and I'm sad about that because I had hopes for this one, but I think it's just the right decision rather than pressing on in a book that's going to wind up being probably a 3-star. So I jumped right into my next arc, and that is Head Cases by John McMahon, and this is a gifted copy I received from Macmillan Audio. And this one has grabbed my attention much better, so I think making a change in reading book was a good decision. This one we're following a unit of the FBI. It's a patterns and recognition unit. It sounds like it's kind of a unit that's being beta tested, or it's being trialed to see if it's going to help. They're tasked with solving some old cases. And in particular, we're following Gardner, who I would describe as neurodivergent. He has a very big focus on patterns and puzzles, and he can recall specific dates, specific numbers, do quick math, but he doesn't necessarily get all the social cues. He has a complicated family life. He has a daughter. He has a wife who is no longer there for reasons that you discover as the book goes on. And he's someone who's trying to forge relationships, and I think the author is doing a good job of showing that just because you aren't neurotypical, that doesn't mean you can't form relationships, you can't appreciate your coworkers, you can't have a family. And I think a lot of those things are coming through well. The case that they're currently working on is not so much a cold case. At the same time, it is a cold case because they just found the dead body of someone who was a serial killer they identified years ago, and at the time identified as dead. So this guy apparently has been alive all this time and now has actually died, and they're looking into what happened. Why did they previously think he was dead? What's he been up to? How is he dead now? All of those types of questions are coming up, and I'm definitely intrigued. The audiobook's been well done, and I'm really enjoying getting to know kind of the coworker aspect, the family aspect, all of those things going on in this book. So this one I will be eagerly continuing and get back to you once I have final thoughts. I've now finished up Head Cases, so here with some final thoughts, and generally they're all pretty positive. I really enjoyed this one. It held my attention really well. I think it was great to consume on audio. I've had a couple of really distracting, really not the best days, and this was a good way to hold my attention, keep me going. It read a lot faster than I anticipated it reading. I really liked our main character, Gardner, and the fact that he is really good at what he does, but he's not infallible. He does make mistakes. They do have dire consequences sometimes. Not everything ends up happy for everyone, but I think it had some good stakes. He had a good cast of characters around him who all had their own kind of issues and intentions, and I think that was fleshed out really well. I thought the plot went well. There were some twists and turns that I definitely didn't predict. There were things I expected that didn't come to fruition, but in a way where I think it was done well. So I think this is getting pretty solid 4-star for me. This book is not labeled as a series, but it absolutely feels like the type of thing that could become a series, and if it was, I would definitely pick up book 2. This reminded me of a lot of my favorite kind of procedural TV police investigation shows, things like CSI. So I think if you like those types of shows and you're looking for those vibes in a book, this is one I would definitely recommend. So with that, I will leave you here, and I'm not sure what my next arc will be, but I'll be back once I know. Hello friends, I am here because I am now halfway into Listen to Your Sister by Neena Viel, and as someone with an older sister, I appreciate the title. I am at 46% currently, but I'm about to crawl into bed and read some more tonight, so I wanted to give an update before I did that. And so far this book has been a lot of setup, and I'm liking it, but I think it's probably really going to amp up in the second half is my guess, because some of the stuff from the synopsis we haven't even really quite gotten to yet. So we're following Kala, who is an older sister. Their mother has been deemed unfit, and so she's taken her teenage brother Jamie in. It's been a struggle for her. Jamie is a very idealistic guy. He wants to be out on the front lines protesting and speaking out against injustice and doing all of these good things that put him in the crosshairs, that get him in trouble. And she's having to miss work to go to the school to deal with consequences. She's having to pick him up after he's been in a protest and the cops have gone for him, and there's just a lot going on. There's also the fact that she has nightmares about him dying and she can't help him. And this is something that's been going on for a while. It's something that terrifies her, and it seems like somehow these dreams are leaching into reality in some way, shape, or form. There's also a third brother, and he's the middle child. He promised to help with the whole parenting situation, but really hasn't stepped up. But in the space of this book, when Jamie gets in trouble at a protest and they have to go on the run, her brother is with them, so it's the three siblings going on the road. They wind up renting an Airbnb that's a very creepy cabin, and that the synopsis talks about being a haunted setting. Things are going to go wrong. Things that Kala has been afraid of or warned about are going to start happening, and the brothers should have been listening to their sister, hence the title. Now, at the 46% mark where I am now, we've barely gotten to this cabin. So up until now, it's really been establishing the relationships between these siblings, their history, where they've been living, and Jamie's involvement in these protests and everything that's gone wrong. So I think that setup has been well done. I think the relationships are well established. The characters are well established. I'm just hoping that in the second half, things are really going to start popping off and getting creepy and getting creepier. We've seen hints of it already, but that's what I'm hoping for in the second half. So once I finish that, I will be back and we'll let you know my final thoughts. I finished up Listen to Your Sister yesterday, and I needed some time to try to process what I just read, and quite frankly, I'm still not entirely sure. It's one of those books, and I closed it, and I tried to figure out how I would even summarize thoughts, or summarize plot movement, or anything along those lines, and it's a really hard one to figure out. It's very fever dream-ish. I would definitely describe it that way. You are getting pulled in with our main characters when it comes to Kala's nightmares and what she's seen and the way it ties into their lives and reality. It's very much not what I expected from the synopsis. For me, the synopsis made it sound like they were going to this Airbnb cabin. It was creepy. It was haunted. There were going to be things there that tied back to this whole nightmare idea, but it really had very little to do with the cabin, I would say. And it takes some really interesting directions and weird directions. Definitely weird book. I would summarize it that way. I would say it's very much about relationships and the way these siblings interact. There's a lot of really complicated feelings between them. They're not always kind to each other. They are not always tight-knit as they are at other times. And I didn't always like the way they were treating each other as they were going through things. But I did appreciate the family link between them. And even as things got really rough and things took really dark turns and they weren't always supporting each other, that there was a link there and a desire to support each other and come back together and to love each other. I still am stuck on what I'm rating this. It winds up being like a 3.5 for me, but the amount of times I've thought, well, round up, round down, round up, round down, it's been very confusing for me. Currently, I've rounded up because I think it did so many things really well. I do think I wasn't quite in the right headspace probably for this type of story, and I think that probably diminished some of my enjoyment part of my rating, but I think the characters were really well developed. I think it's a really interesting idea and concept, and the author did a really good job of building a lot of that out. So I think it does deserve the 4 stars, but I would go into this with a really open mind. I would go into this expecting weirdness and expecting it to maybe not 100% make sense. Even when you get answers, there are still things about it I'm unclear about. I think it would be great as a discussion book because I think there's a lot to pick apart and theorize and kind of have all of those types of conversations about this book. So I'm looking forward to seeing some more people read it that I can talk to about this book. So with that, I am going to go ahead and wrap this particular book up here and be back with you as soon as I have started my next arc. I am back with you because I have now started and made it almost halfway into Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. This one's coming out on January 14th. And this is one I've been excited for because this is an author I've been known to love, but also one I've been a little bit wary of just in the fact that it's historical. It's long. It's nearly 500 pages. It's 15 hours of audio. And it wasn't one I necessarily was sure I was going to love. And I'm still kind of feeling that. We're following a group of young women. They are underage, they are all pregnant, they're sent away by their families to this home for wayward girls. And here they are meant to live, be taken care of, get medical care, and when they have their babies, they're going to give them up for adoption to someone else. A lot of the first half of the book is just the setup of all of this and the home and the way the girls are getting to know each other and their pregnancies, and I'm finding it slow to get into as it starts and as it starts to get moving. I think after the first third of the book or so, Kylie's flinging toys behind you, so background noise is to be expected. We start to get into some of the more witchy, occulty parts of the book, and that I'm finding a little more interesting. There's a book of occult that gets given to these girls, and they're not being taken care of in the best ways. The doctor is heavy-handed, the people running the home are difficult, they're putting them through a lot of really gross things to try to say that they're taking care of them and addressing their health concerns, but not in the best way possible. They're not very understanding of morning sickness or letting them out of difficult chores because they are 8 months pregnant and having trouble navigating their bodies and things like that. So this book of occult comes into their hands, and it's the first time they have power of their own and ability to kind of push back on the people who are oppressing them. And I like a lot of the discussions we're getting. I like the fact that these girls are finding agency and starting to make some of their own decisions in life, but it is still feeling really slow. So at this point, I'm liking it. I'm not loving it, and I'm happy to keep reading it, but it's just not one that's necessarily at any given moment calling me to prioritize it and pick it up over other things that I have currently going on. So I don't know. We'll see how the second half of the book goes. I think as we get more into them being able to use some of these witchy powers, I think that could make the book much more interesting as we go. I am mostly listening to this on audio. I do have a gifted copy of the audiobook from PRH Audio and a gifted ebook from Berkley, so I'm eager to continue on, and I'll let you know how it's going once I get to my final thoughts. I'm back with some final thoughts on Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, and ultimately I think this wasn't really a me type of book. I think it was well written. I think it handled the subjects pretty well. As someone who's never had a baby and never been a pregnant teen, I think it delved into a lot of issues and a lot of the questions and uncomfortable moments that come out of that. I think it got weird toward the end, and it did kind of get more into the Grady Hendrix sort of horror style that I'm used to. But the book as a whole, I probably personally wouldn't really call it a horror book. It was more historical with fantasy and witchcraft layered on, and then some horror elements also in the mix. I will say, since I did consume a lot of this on audio, that when we come to a labor scene, and I don't feel like labor is a spoiler, when you're talking about a home for people in a very advanced stage of their pregnancy, there are a lot of noises and sounds that the narrator gets into that go on for a pretty extended period of time that aren't the most pleasant in the earbuds. So maybe, think about reading this one physically, or at least having the physical so you can switch to it in places. Overall, I think the audiobook was done well. I think characters were done well. The writing was done well. I think it just didn't quite hit for what my reading preferences are, and it wasn't what I expected from a Grady Hendrix novel going into it, which a lot of that is on me. So this winds up being a 3.5, rounded down to 3 for me personally, and a lot of that is just the enjoyment rating. But while my enjoyment maybe was lower, I can't fault the book. The book had a lot of good things going for it, so I think a 3.5 is a fair rating. So with that, I'll leave it here, and I'll be back with my next book. I made it to 51% in More or Less Maddy by Lisa Genova, and this is a gifted audio arc that I received from Simon Audio, and this one comes out on the 14th of January. This is an author that I really have liked in the past. I read Still Alice by this author, and that one was focusing in on a woman dealing with Alzheimer's, and that hit very close to home since we did lose my grandfather to Alzheimer's, and so I kind of went into this one expecting it to be hard hard-hitting, expecting it to be really well done. In this one, we're following the title character, Maddy, and she's a freshman in college, and she's been dealing with different things. She's been through a breakup, she's dealing with the stress of school, she's been really down, and they put her on an antidepressant, and this sends her spiraling in the other direction, and she winds up in a mania. The depressive episode followed by a manic episode, and then she winds up kind of going back the other direction again. They do give her a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, and basically we're following her as she's getting this diagnosis, as she's grappling with what this means, that it's not just typical freshman behavior to get overwhelmed and stressed and depressed, but that there's something biological, something chemical going on with her that's more. And we're following her POV, but we're also seeing the people around her and how they're reacting to this development in her life, and maybe putting a lot of pressure on her, or just spending maybe more time than they need to following up with her to make sure she's doing what she needs to do to stay healthy, and seeing kind of how that can be a caring thing for them to be doing, but maybe it's not giving her the feeling of being cared for, but the feeling of being pressured and controlled. And that's kind of the point we're at this halfway mark, and I've really been enjoying this. I think it took me a little bit longer to get into in the very beginning. I think maybe because it is such a young character compared to Still Alice, where it was an older woman. I think maybe that impacts my reading a little bit of it, but I'm still really enjoying kind of getting this glimpse of what mental health looks like in Maddy's case. And as someone who works in mental health, I'm admin. I don't directly deal with clients that often, but a lot of the stories in this definitely sound familiar. Things I've heard, things that I've seen in housing applications that I'm processing, and mental health assessments that I'm doing reviews of as part of my QA duties. So far, as someone who can't speak from an own voice's point of view with the bipolar diagnosis, I do feel like it does resonate and does have truth in it. So I definitely will look when I get to the end of it and see if there have been any comments from people who have mentioned being an own voices reviewer. But so far, I think this is well done. It's keeping my attention. I flew through half of it today. Today was my first day back at work following COVID and other things going on in life. So definitely needed a good book to kind of help through the day, and this one lived up to the challenge. So I'm eager to keep going on it, and I figure I will be back pretty soon with final thoughts. I finished up more or less Maddy while I was at work today doing some good multitasking, and I had a great time with this book. I think saying that I had a great time with it maybe is the wrong way to phrase it. I really appreciated this book. I was very much hooked on Maddy's story. I think the author did a really good job of looking at things like medication and why people want to go off their medications and the side effects of their medications and all of those types of things. I think it looked really well at the family dynamics and the fears that families have of a person kind of having a relapse and what that looks like and what recovery looks like, but also looking at someone who wants something in their life, who wants to not be defined by their diagnosis. And Maddy has been working towards the idea of being a comedian, and that's something her family doesn't necessarily approve of, and that leads to maybe some risky behaviors, or maybe it just leads to Maddy standing up for herself. And I think all of that was balanced really well. It's definitely a heavy-hitting book, but I think the overall idea is uplifting. There are positives that come out of things as well, and I really appreciated how the author wrapped all of this up. In the author's note, she talks about the fact that she has kind of scientific knowledge of these various disorders she talks about in different books, but this was her first foray into mental illness, and I appreciated her discussion about that as well in the notes after the book. So this gets a really solid 4-star for me, a high 4-star, I think. It didn't quite hook me in enough to be a 5-star book for me, but I really did appreciate everything about it. So with this one, I am going to go ahead and wrap up this arc attack here. I think that I do have lots more that I would love to get to, but we've gotten to, I think, 7 at this point, and I would like to get this video up before a lot of these come out on Tuesday to help provide some information, maybe if you're looking for some input on whether or not to pick some of them them up. For our first ARC attack of 2025, I think this shows that there's some really fantastic books coming in the new year. Not all of them necessarily live up to my expectations for them, but I think we have a lot of variety and a lot of good things to look forward to. Let me know in the comments below, are you planning on picking any of these books up? Are any of these authors or topics that you would be interested in reading about? And if you made it this far and don't have anything to comment, leave me a brain emoji for more or less Maddy. If you could hit that like button below, I would surely appreciate it. And please subscribe if you're interested in more of my ARC attacks, more of my book reviews, and more of my bookish content in general. But for now, I'll leave you here. I'll go play some fetch with Kylie, who's over here patiently, semi-patiently waiting, and catch you real soon in a new video.